Why would one man orchestrate the murder of 6 million innocent people? It's one of the most horrifying questions in human history. And to answer it, we must travel back, not just through the years, but into the darkest depths of ideology, fear, and power. This is not just the story of Adolf Hitler. This is the story of how hate, when combined with propaganda, war, and blind loyalty, can destroy millions of lives. Let's begin. Adolf Hitler did not wake up one morning and decide to kill 6 million Jews. It was not a sudden act. It was a slow-burning fire, one that had been ignited long before he even rose to power. After World War I, Germany was a nation in ruins. Economically shattered, politically unstable, and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, the German people were angry, lost, and desperate for answers. They needed someone to blame. And that's where Hitler came in. He was not just a politician. He was a master manipulator, a fiery orator, and a man with a vision, twisted, dangerous, and deeply rooted in hate. In his infamous book Mein Kampf, which he wrote in prison in 1924, Hitler laid out his beliefs in shocking clarity. He portrayed Jews as the enemy of Germany, calling them parasites, conspirators, and destroyers of civilizations. But why the Jews? Anti-Semitism wasn't new in Europe. In fact, Jews had been persecuted for centuries. But Hitler weaponized that prejudice. He turned centuries-old myths and lies into a deadly political tool. To him, Jews were not just a religious group. They were a race he considered inferior, a race he believed was plotting to weaken Germany from within. And he used this belief to rally support. As the Nazi Party rose to power, Hitler promised to restore Germany's greatness. But behind that promise was a terrifying plan to reshape society according to his twisted idea of racial purity. When he became chancellor in 1933, the machinery of genocide began turning slowly, but surely. First, Jews were pushed to the margins of society. Laws were passed to strip them of their rights. They were no longer allowed to work in public offices, teach, or even marry non-Jews. They were publicly humiliated, labeled, and segregated. The world watched, and mostly, the world stayed silent. Then came the propaganda. Nazi newspapers, films, and radio broadcasts poured poison into the minds of ordinary Germans. Jews were portrayed as greedy, evil, and dangerous. Children in schools were taught to hate. Neighbors turned into informants. And then came Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, in 1938. Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues were attacked across Germany. It was no longer just about discrimination. It had become violence. But even then, most people could not imagine what was coming. Then came World War II. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, he brought with him the SS, his brutal paramilitary force. As they advanced, they rounded up Jews into ghettos, forcing them into overcrowded, disease-ridden quarters with barely enough food to survive. But the ghettos were only temporary. Behind closed doors, the Nazis were planning something far worse. In 1942, top Nazi officials met at a villa in Wannsee, near Berlin. There, they discussed what they called the final solution to the Jewish question. Their decision? Systematic extermination. Not just persecution, not just violence, mass murder. This was not done in rage or chaos. It was cold, calculated, organized. The Nazis built death camps, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and others, designed purely to kill. Trains packed with Jewish families arrived daily. Many were sent straight to gas chambers disguised as showers. Others were worked to death, starved, or used in horrifying medical experiments. Children, women, men. Entire families vanished in smoke and ash, and yet, inside Germany, many people claimed they didn't know. Some were afraid to speak, others chose to look away, and some agreed. It's chilling, isn't it? How ordinary people can become part of something so monstrous. Hitler's power didn't come only from his hate. It came from the silence of millions, the obedience of soldiers, the collaboration of bureaucrats, and the apathy of bystanders. So, again, Why did Hitler kill 6 million Jews? Because he believed in a world where only his kind should survive. Because he saw Jews not as people, but as a threat to his dream of a pure German empire. Because he had the power, and the world failed to stop him in time. But make no mistake, this was not just Hitler's crime. It was the crime of a system, a machine built on propaganda, fear, and obedience. It is a reminder that genocide doesn't begin with gas chambers. It begins with words, with lies, with the slow erosion of truth and humanity. And what makes it even more horrifying is that it didn't have to happen. At any moment, someone could have said no, someone could have spoken up, but too few did. 6 million Jews, mothers, fathers, children, teachers, artists, bakers, doctors, they weren't soldiers, they weren't enemies, they were human beings, murdered because of who they were. And even today, when we hear stories of Holocaust survivors, we hear not just tales of pain, but of unimaginable strength, of hope, of survival. Their voices are the reason we must never forget. So when someone asks, why did Hitler kill 6 million Jews? The answer is not simple. It's a web of history, hate, silence, and ideology, but the result is clear: genocide, and unless we learn from it, unless we speak out against hate in all its forms, it could happen again. That's why we tell these stories. That's why we remember, because the past is not just behind us. It's a warning of what happens when hate wins. And now it's up to us to ensure it never does again.